Good evening, everybody. Let's bow in. So tonight, we're continuing our progress through the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And we're going to be going through chapters 45 and 46. And Laura will start this evening. So Laura, take it away.
Thank you. The practice of vipashyana, or awareness practice, brings artfulness to our living. I should tell you, the name of this chapter is The Art of Everyday Living, not to give anything away. While with shamatha practice comes a sense of awake or being in the present moment, with vipassana practice comes a confidence in how to be in the present moment, the how of synchronizing body, speech, and mind. Vipassana brings in the novel, the fresh, as well as ways of being with what's already here. It opens us to multiple perspectives, to the many different possibilities of artistic creation. Although it may be lightly done, shamatha practice has an element of a demand that we put on ourselves. While there can be momentary freedom from the struggle of conflicting thoughts, the liberation from the chatter in the mind, there is also a slight sense of duty, of restriction, narrowing our focus to the breath or another object of meditation. And this creates a subtle tension in our minds and in our bodies. Vipassana is based on something completely different. We aren't making ourselves do something so much as being with appreciation, living appreciation, turning into our inner and outer experience with appreciation. This isn't based on value judgments. It isn't evaluating what around us is good or beautiful or desirable. It isn't reminding ourselves of all the things we should be grateful for. Living appreciation comes from seeing, from experiencing the unique intricacy of this moment. It's recognizing that even with seemingly repetitive activities, like for instance, brushing her teeth in the morning, that this time, this activity, this brushing has never happened before. We've never experienced it before. Trungpa Rinpoche says this creates a kind of intimacy with our lives, this close and deep knowing of now. This way of being makes our lives a work of art. He contrasts this close, intimate relating with the activities of our lives with the experience one might have if you went to a special program or retreat for awareness practice. He says experiencing awareness through specific exercises in a retreat is not enough. It could even be a hindrance to your vipassana practice. The hindrance would come from seeing what you've experienced during the retreat as something special, something profound, something sacred, something separate from one's normal everyday life. It's kind of a cutting up of your experience. As real vipassana develops, there is continuity in one's view of one's life. You don't, quote, chop your experiences into categories or put them into pigeonholes. There's just this moment, which continues into this one, and then now this. Vipassana practice does require effort, but not with the mindset that now I'm doing something that's very important, very serious, very meaningful, sacred even. This can just generate mind-numbing resistance. Resistance that builds to the degree that you label what you're doing a big deal. Rather, effort here is simple, direct, without a lot of thinking. Trungpa says, whether you're practicing or studying, you just do it. You just sit or just study. And when you sit, you're not sitting there like a jellyfish. You exert yourself into the energy of meditation and take part in it. Exertion doesn't mean doing it with aggression. Aggression blocks artistic expression, whether you're creating art or creating art of your everyday life. Making art requires the capacity to watch and be with your own awkwardness and vulnerability, to tolerate your own not knowing where something is going. Creative expression does not follow preset plans, so by its very nature, it arises from a field of not knowing. You're holding the not knowing, the awkwardness, gently, lightly. And Vipassana practice grows our tolerance for sitting with the unknown. It allows space for contradictions, paradoxes, multiples, without needing to select a right one. Holding lightly, perhaps even with humor. Trungpa says humor can be the opposite of aggression. Humor does not insist upon itself. It can surprise us with an unexpected twist, a fresh crossing of two seemingly unrelated ideas or experiences, a novel way of looking at the familiar. Aggression, on the other hand, shuts down and insists on its own certainty, its own viewpoint, its own preferred outcome. And an aggressive attitude sees no refinement, no subtleties, no difference between things. It operates with a crude, broad stroke. Aggression expects aggression back from the world, and therefore sees no value coming from the world, no gain in opening up to something outside oneself, no point in slowing down for the details. This annihilating of details, of context, the false equivalency of no difference in unique situations is the opposite of the refinement of artistic vision. Trungpa says, quote, the crudeness is extremely dumb and blind and misses the subtleties of life, the interesting bits. And with no interest in refinement or subtleties, aggression has no need to be meticulous, no need to be careful, no need to be precise. There's no point in engaging and re-engaging freshly with the world, because Aggression's already made up its mind about what the outcome should be. Trungpa says, quote, aggression kills that potential of going back. It prevents you from developing the patience to actually experience something, to slow down and actually experience something intimately and thoroughly. Through commitment to engage and re-engage, training both the arts and in meditation involves patience and discipline. The patient discipline grows in you until you own your training as a part of you and not something imposed or provisionally given from without. The training lives in you, fully digested, yours to express or present as you will. Trungpa likens this authority to that of a lineage holder to express what they've learned in whatever new language or form fits the contents of their audience and times. In the East, training in the arts and meditation is very slow, very long, very traditional. In the West, we have a need for speed. Speed brings to the learning process impatience and aggression to get through. Trungpa suggests that even if you're starting from a clear place of patience, the Western desire and cultural context of getting things quickly, faster, better than others, that catches you up. And with this emphasis on aggressive competition, we evaluate ourselves based on how quickly we're getting it. We may measure ourselves as successful and feel secretly superior to those taking the long path. This insistence on quick results can contradict the organic, natural flow or process of learning. Trungpa says, it goes against the natural pace of the cosmos. It's like, quote, seeing summer in the middle of winter, or what we like to call February in the 21st century. The aggression may look like something you direct outward, or it may be directed inward as a sort of inner critic. In either case, it shuts down possibilities of rich experiencing of the world. Anger and uptightness, they cut us off from our own resources, from a rich fascination with what arises around us. They cut us off from our sources of inspiration. Speed and aggression can also characterize training and meditation practice. Meditation programs that promise to improve you, make you happier, healthier, better, are embracing speed and aggression. With genuine meditation practice, there is discipline and effort, but no guarantees. Trungpa says, when you sit, whether you get it at that moment or not is up to you. And if you don't get it, bad luck, just go and sit more. Vipassana practice gives us the training to relate to our lives as inspired human beings. There is an enormous appreciation of life. Living as an inspired human being is what Trungpa calls Vipassana artistry. We're inspired by the present moment as we return again and again to it. And from this practice of patience, we begin to experience the contrast between our evaluating, judging watcher and mindfulness of whatever is here now. Awareness practice includes all aspects of our experience, noticing even what our aggression and speed feel like, how they live in the body. This awareness allows all situations to become workable. it gives us the opportunity to transmit the energy of psychological aggression. We can transmute it into the energy of artistic creation. Awareness practice opens up and frees the energy of neurotic examination. Our awareness shifts from a narrow, focused hunting or seeking of a desired outcome to an open awareness of the space we're in. It opens channels of our natural abilities and potential. Making art then comes down to expressing or presenting that experience we've opened up to. Trungpa says, you just say it, just play it, just paint it. No tricks or extra is needed. It's expression, free and clear of the self-conscious watcher. It loosens a creative energy, and making art comes naturally. And then there's a confidence in our artistic process where we're in touch with our own resources, our own authority, our own experience. There can also be vipashyana artistry in the way we conduct ourselves in society. Specific cultures have prescribed ways of behaving that are considered civilized, whether we're talking about the proper way to speak, to communicate, to cook, to invite or not invite people to our gatherings. They prescribe specific ways to be polite, refined, respectable. These proper manners can be rejected as affective or ostentatious. The problem, though, isn't with the culturally approved norms, but with the aggression in which we relate to them. Trungpa says gentility has nothing to do with a particular culture. Rather, it has to do with your instincts being open and having the room to bring your potentialities into action. Whether we're properly shopping or cooking or Zooming or drinking tea, awareness practice allows us the artful pause. It gives us access to our intuitions, our instincts, and the space to act from them. Beyond this making of a proper cup of tea or being a good host in a dinner party as a practice of patience and refinement rather than of aggression and crudeness in our interactions with others. Beyond that, there's a connection between gentility and becoming a bodhisattva. As we'll study, the Mahayana version of gentility is the profound aspiration to exchange self for others, to live one's life for the benefit of all other sentient beings. On the Hinayana level, Trungpa says you don't have to start on such a big scale. You can start on the practical level of developing your awareness of that potential or possibility. We can bring that aspect of gentility, its seed of the profound aspiration of Mahayana, to our Vipassana practice. To conclude, Trungpa says, quote, within the Vipassana experience is the awareness that everyday life is a work of art if you see it from the point of view of non-aggression. Living from this place, we find genuine art isn't about the beautiful or decorative, but comes from directly experiencing and appreciating the intricacy and the richness of whatever rises in our world. Making art calls on this Vipassana experience of everything being workable and rich, and takes out the speed and aggression of ego. And then whether we're making a piece of art or making art out of our lives, artistic energy and talent flows and flows. So I have some resources for anyone who's interested in exploring this in more detail. I could put them in the chat, or John maybe could email. Let's see if they'll go into the chat. They're books, and
I'd like that.
yeah, okay. They're books, they're web pages, there's video, and there's specifically a book called True Perceptions by Chögyam Rinpoche, The Path of Dharma Art, where he lays out in a number of essays. And then another teacher that I had that took those concepts and did training in contemplative photography. And that's Miriam Hall. And she has a couple books with her co-author, John McQuaid, I think. And then finally, there's a book by Stephen Satzik. I can't say his last name, but I'm sure John knows him. He's the guy who is in charge of Shambhala arts. And so there's some video. He has a book where he's trying to give a new take or translate True Perceptions, because True Perceptions is kind of a tough book, or a little bit uneven at any time. And he's also talking about all the different Shambhala art programs that have through Shambhala. I'll just read you one quote from there. The creative process can be a form of meditation in action when it begins with coming to our senses and arriving at square one. We do this naturally when we unconditionally face a blank piece of paper, an empty stage, an idle instrument, or an unplanted garden, and allow inspiration to naturally arise out of that space. If that inspiration is met with mindfulness and awareness, it can be given shape and form and built into a result that has a life and energy of its own that others can perceive and experience. Okay. So I will try to put that in chat. Well, John, why don't you teach us chapter 46?
Thank you, Laura. That was terrific. Barry, can you switch the view? Thank you. Hello, everybody. So, a few words about vipashyana before we launch into this chapter. We never abandon shunyata. Shunyata is mindfulness. In order to practice vipashyana, we have to be mindful. Mindful means that we're not lost in dreams of the past and the future, but we have come present in one way or another. In strict shamatha practice, mindfulness practice, we use an object of awareness to come present, like the breath or a mantra, although it could be anything. It could be an object in front of you that you bring your awareness to. And in doing that, you come back from the dreams of the past and the future, which are always fraught with anxiety. And they are fraught with the desire that things should be otherwise, that thought. That thought is really the seed, or maybe the essence, of the aggression that Trungpa Rinpoche talks about. The aggression wants things to be different than they are, according to some idea that one has about how they should be. And so we walk around wishing things were different, lost in a fog of thought, contemplation about how things are wrong and how they might be right. This is the fundamental working of aggression. It has nothing to do with coming present and working with the situation as it is in this present moment in a wholesome way. It has to do, aggression, with wanting things to change according to some idea that we have about the future. When we look at the past and we regret, we don't like what it was, we're really thinking about the future and how we would want it to be different than the past. Vipassana is coming present and working with this current situation to make it wholesome. Wholesome means appreciative of this life as it is arising now, including all of the pain and suffering in it. That doesn't mean that we don't stop aggression when we encounter it, quite the reverse. We engage in correct action, right action, which always has to do with as much as we can, as much as it is possible, to bring ourselves and our friends and all the people around us into appreciation of this life as it arises in the only time it ever appears, which is now. And so the practice of Vipassana is the practice of constantly coming back, which is mindfulness, into this life, this whole life. So Vipassana is very wide. Sometimes it's called panoramic awareness. Instead of being focused on one thing, we are aware of everything. In the beginning, you might turn that everything into a kind of object of its own, but ultimately it becomes real. It becomes, because everything is real right now. It's all, whatever you can experience, this whole room, everything is in front of you, behind you that you can see, and this voice and this person on the computer screen and the thoughts going through your mind, all of this is arising in the present moment, passing away, and that's what we come back to, and that's what we work with. In an appreciative, wholesome way. Appreciative doesn't mean that you necessarily think that what you're experiencing is the way things ought to be. It means that you actually see them as they are and work with them as they are. Without Vipassana awareness, which is clear, understanding, empty, and utterly clear and appreciative of this present moment and everything that's in it. And without that, we can't begin to really understand the depths of the Buddhist teachings. So he starts out by saying, without that, you can't understand the Four Noble Truths, much less the doctrine of egolessness. The Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. These things become clear in Vipassana because we are giving up our preconceptions and we are simply seeing this world as it is, including our own suffering. And we understand much more clearly, in bringing that clarity to it, its origin, how it arises. It arises out of a self-concern for me and a wish that things would be better for me and imagined better. And that there is an end to this suffering that is seen clearly. That the end is simply coming present and appreciating this world now. And the path, the fourth noble truth, is the practice, however imperfect, because we are imperfect and we start that way, of coming back to this present moment, of being aware of what is going on in this present moment again and again. We're really working a revolution in our way of being because we have been so inured and so habituated to constantly wishing things were otherwise, and even trying to make them otherwise, according to some vision of the future coming from the past. So really, vipassana is about giving up aggression, that kind of aggression, the aggression of wanting the world to be different than it is and being unwilling to work with it as it is. So he goes through some things here which I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on, these different divisions of vipassana. The second one is more interesting than the first. These come out of traditional Buddhist teachings, and he was working out of a very traditional text when he gave these teachings. The second being the difference between discriminating awareness and immovability. Immovability he calls a kind of absorption, in which awareness is constantly present and stable and cannot move or shift. You finally realize that there is no other practice than this. You have been converted to vipassana, and you have faith and trust in it, and you rest, and you are immovable for however long you can in this awareness, in this present moment. Vipassana is the core practice in Buddhism. It goes throughout the path, this awareness of the present moment. It's effortless when it's done completely, because it's already here. It's part of us. It's what we are. It's what our minds and intelligence are. This effortless awareness of the present moment. You don't have to make an effort to hear these words or see the image on your computer screen. You might have to make an effort to come back if you get lost in thought. And that's the action, that's the mindfulness practice. But the awareness practice, once you come back, any effort only obscures it. And so we constantly are dropping the effort and just being here, now. And this, when we begin to practice it well, becomes very solid and immovable. And it becomes very intelligent, because when we're here in the present, we can see all the differences between all the different things that are arising and passing away. We become much more discriminating in the sense of seeing the differences between all the phenomena that appear to us. Now, then he goes through these three stages of vipassana, and I'm going to do this rather quickly because the third is really what we want. The first is called Chipa, which means acting like an infant. And the thing here is that it's very simple. When you start practicing a lot, for any of you who have done intensive practices, perhaps going on a group retreat or even a solitary retreat, if you're practicing 8-10 hours a day, you begin to experience hallucinations, he calls them. Different kinds of things. You might see smoke, a kind of mist or veil in your eyes. You might feel as though you're floating off your cushion. A very common one is you begin to see the floor move. And the meditation instructor, if you have one when you're doing this intensive practice, will just tell you, relax, let it go, it'll disappear, and it does, because these are just temporary hallucinations. The second stage is called Ronyam, which means equal taste. Sometimes it's called Rochik, which means one flavor, and these are big terms in Vajrayana Buddhism too. And basically what this refers to is experiencing the simplicity and the beauty of awareness, that one can relax into it and it is so vivid. Everything in your awareness becomes much more vivid because you're giving up the peregrinations of mind. Your shamatha, he says, is strong and stable. That means you come back, you're here. And so you begin to see the simplicity and straightforwardness of awareness practice, vipassana, this panoramic awareness, tuning into this awareness that is already in us. It's always there. It's part of our fundamental nature, or to put it in Buddhist terms, our Buddha nature. The third stage of Vipassana is called Teishin Mikpa. And in fact, I don't know if it's still in existence. There used to be a division of Trungpa Rinpoche students who practiced photography, and they called it Mikpa. The group was called Mikpa. It means seeing like that. And really what it means is true perception, knowledge. And he calls this is called the Maha Vipassana experience. Maha means great. Vipassana, we know, insight, awareness. So it's the great awareness experience. It's beyond just Vipassana. It's the transition from Vipassana to shunyata, emptiness. And he's going to talk some about emptiness, shunyata. Shunyata is the Sanskrit for emptiness. Shunya means void, empty. Ta is a nominative. It turns it into a noun. So it's shunyata, emptiness. And through Vipassana, we move into shunyata. Actually, there's a wonderful teacher who wrote a book, or he didn't write a book, his students transcribed some of his talks. His name is Tulku Ujin, and the name of his book was Rainbow Painting. And it's a series of essays. He was the father of Tsoknyi Rinpoche, Mingyur Rinpoche, and Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, all teachers abroad today. He was their father and great Dzogchen master, great teacher of Dzogchen, the great perfection. And there's an essay in the book Rainbow Painting in which he says that the core practice is Vipassana, and it stays the same throughout the path. It is always resting one's mind effortlessly, to whatever degree you can, in this present moment, awareness of awareness, the natural, innate, inborn awareness that we all have. But what happens is that the more one practices this, the world itself transforms. One's understanding of what the world is and what we are in it all transform, and they take on different names. And the next name that the world takes on is beyond the name beyond the Hinayana level of the path, where we just call it the world, is shunyata, voidness, emptiness. Because through the practice of Vipassana, we begin to understand the two main principles of emptiness. The first one that we understand, that comes first, is that what we have called an I is just a myth. Or, as Trungpa Rinpoche once bellowed, a lie. That I is a lie. It just is not true. It's a statement we make from time to time, and then it's gone. And there's just this open awareness, arising and passing continually in the present moment. The second aspect of shunyata, which comes later, it's the second development, is the understanding that not only does I not exist, but neither does other. That typewriter, that person sitting across from you, that computer screen, they are all non-existent as well. And what it means by non-existent is that they don't endure through time. That's just a myth. You only encounter them in the moment. That they are not one thing. They're composite. They're made up of many different parts, infinite numbers of parts, in fact. And they're not independent. Everything arises in this present moment as part of a matrix of dependency on everything else. So my computer is dependent on the space around it, which defines it, and many, many other things. And so nothing truly exists. This is shunyata. It's complete voidness, emptiness. empty of I and other. But within that emptiness, there is also an extraordinary fullness, because when you take away the concreteness of things, this idea that they exist through time as unitary and independent, then everything is arising so vividly in the present moment, so full of color and sound and smell and taste and sensation and all kinds of things, that it's extremely colorful. And the term for that, the flip side of emptiness, is luminosity. The Sanskrit for that is prabhasvara, and they go together. But initially, the first experience, the first discovery that one encounters on the path is that of shunyata. The emptiness comes secondarily. It might come very quickly, it might not, it might come long, but already, even at the hinayana level, the beginning level of the path, by working on the artistic aspect of our lives, we're bringing forward that luminosity, the beauty of this world, in all its aspects. Whenever I read these teachings, I always think of Trungpa Rinpoche. You can watch him in a video sometimes. The way he held a glass, smoked a cigarette, moved his arms, and gestured. There was a tremendous feeling of presence and consciousness and grace, as though every aspect of his movement, his being, his presentation was worth being there for fully. And I think that's a living demonstration of the art of vipashyana. So really, this is about developing in this space of awareness appreciation for one's life, instead of the aggression of wishing that it were otherwise. And appreciation doesn't mean that there aren't going to be terrible things that arise in your life. There will be ultimately death. But we can work with that in a compassionate way, a helpful way for ourselves and for the others around us. And that is the art of vipashyana. In an open-hearted, even cheerful way that we can work with everything in our lives. He says about the shunyata, in practicing vipashyana, coming into this present moment. You see, when we come fully into the present, anytime, we're giving up thoughts of I and other. And so egolessness is there. It's not there as a presence, it's there as the absence of the thinking of me. And he says you have a glimpse that you are inherently nothing. That's in the rearview mirror. You have this moment of awareness, and then you look back on it and you say, in that moment, I wasn't there. It was just pure awareness of this moment, of whatever was happening. He says in Mahavipashyana, there's an enormous feeling of being helped out rather than helped in. You are pulled out of whatever realm, meaning whatever neurotic mindset you are in, into a realm or psychological state that is completely empty. You begin to realize that you do not have an origin and you don't belong anywhere. It's groundless. In the beginning, as we practice, this comes to us in moments and flashes. And the more we relax and the more we practice, the more it begins to take us over in a very gentle way. It's not something that you have to create. Can't. It's not created. It's something that appears in one's life. It has nothing to do with me and my accomplishment, me and my failings. It just comes through the path, through the process, through the act of meditation, of constantly coming back and letting go into this moment of present awareness. He says, there is lots of fear because you might have a fear of this groundlessness, of this emptiness. It is as if you are riding and you lose your grip on the reins, or as if your car begins to go by itself and the steering wheel doesn't work. Something slowly begins to take over so that the path comes to you. You don't go to the path. Practice is in your mind all the time. That's really so important and reassuring, really, that the more you practice, the path comes to you. You don't go to the path. You just suddenly notice things are changing. Then realizing that there is no ground ultimately becomes a source of celebration and joy. It's a celebration and a joyfulness of this world. It's a celebration of this world as it arises now. It's a matter of letting go into this. He says at this stage, the experience that you have nothing to hold on to is continual. Ultimately, it keeps progressing, that lack of letting go, and takes you into the vipashyana, the most advanced stage of the path. But in this case, it's just the simple experience that you exist, but at the same time, you do not have any ground. You have no ground because awareness is constant, and the characteristic of awareness is emptiness, this space. I'm just reading these quotes. The idea of release or liberation, which we all devoutly desire, in Mahavipashyana discipline, is to have a glimpse of groundlessness. The closer you, a glimpse of groundlessness, doesn't have to be the whole thing. It just comes. It's not something you can create. The closer you are to enlightened mind, the more your development takes you in that direction. The more groundless you are, and the less ego there is. Ego is evaporating, that sense of I, in a very natural, relaxed way. Egolessness, he says, is the root of vipashyana. You lose your reference point, and you become thinner and thinner, so to speak. This is not something one aspires to or tries for. You do the practice. You appreciate this world in all its beauty as it arises now. This happens naturally. Patience is required and letting go. And yet it's not as if you do one thing, you get a result. It's more as if you subject yourself to this discipline. The change happens. At this level, you are introduced in one way or another, and I'm sure many people in this room are, to the egolessness of self. It comes in glimpses or more, depending on the individual. And what is ultimately coming is the egolessness or the lack of existence through existence of phenomena, that everything is a constant arising and passing away in this mirror of the present moment. He says of shamatha, it's simply concentration. Even hunters have it because, they're concentrated on They're prey. This is the practice that's done in yoga studios, transcendental meditation, the practice of concentration on an object. And it has the virtue of bringing you back from dream into the present moment. But beyond that is the Buddhist practice of awareness. And he says, unless you develop vipassana and realize the importance of wakefulness, you will have only a very distant view of the vipashyana, the most advanced stages of the path, or even the levels of the Mahayana. And then finally, without vipassana experience, you don't have any idea of who you are, what you are, how you are, or why you are at all. It is very important and absolutely necessary to respect the need for vipassana experience and practice. That is such an amazing statement. Without vipassana experience, you don't have any idea of who you are, what you are, how you are, or why you are. It's because we're lost in dreams about who I am and what I should be and what I was. And who the immediate, frail, all too human person sitting in front of looking at you out of the screen, as I'm doing with myself right now, is not available because we're constantly thinking of, oh, I want it to be this way. I don't want it to be the other way. The anxieties are always, always about the future, that we want to be something that we feel we're not. And so without vipassana, total awareness, not only of oneself, but of the environment around yourself, one has no idea of who you are, what you are, how you are, why you are at all. And the flip side of that statement is that with vipassana, you do understand. You begin to, and then finally do understand who you are, what you are, how you are, and why you are, in all of its human frailty. Rinpoche once said to us in the early, early days, he looked out at us and he said, the Buddha was a completely ordinary human being. And then he looked at us and he said, the problem with you is that you want to be extraordinary. And he was telling us, it's really a matter of embracing one's humanity. And you do that by coming back into the vipassana awareness, which goes so deep, it goes all the way to the end of the path. So I think that's enough. This chapter was called Glimpses of Shunyata. We're coming to Shunyata more in the second volume of the Profound Treasury. It's the hallmark of the Mahayana. Rinpoche talked about the Bodhisattva in the previous chapter. That's the quintessential practitioner of the Mahayana who is inspired to devote his or her life to helping others. And the main hallmark of the Bodhisattva is that they have discovered shunyata, emptiness. And so they have moved into the realm of the real. And in that realm, they understand that the only thing really worth doing is to be of service to others. So on that note, we could have a discussion. You can ask questions of Laura or myself or Barry. And we also have a discussion tomorrow night after the meditation, which you're welcome to come to. It's been quite terrific, actually. Usually you have about 15, 20 people and lots of time for people to talk. So, comments, questions, complaints?
has something, and Robert also.
So I have a question. Thank you, uh, Laura and John, for tonight. On page 351, it says um, at the Mahavipashyana level, you've been introduced to the egolessness of self, and you're just about to be introduced to the egolessness of phenomena. I don't know if I missed something when you were speaking, but in particular, the introduced to the egolessness of phenomena, if you could maybe shed some light.
It simply means the egolessness of other, of I and other. I is this sort of abstract thought that we have, but then there is the arising of all the phenomena. And we take them to be truly existing, all the objects of the senses and of mind. But they're not. They're just momentary happenings that as soon as they appear, they are disappearing. And so what one understands first on the path is the egolessness or the non-existence of self, this I, this myth, this sack of woe that we carry around with ourselves, constantly worrying about me. And then once one begins to understand that, the next stage, so-called, is the understanding of the egolessness or the non-existence of other. Now, connected with the belief in I, we have lots and lots of conflicting emotions because we're caught up in hatred and desire and jealousy and all pride and all these. So when you cut the veil of belief in I, this is sometimes also called the veil of conflicting emotions, and one becomes really free, much freer. And when you cut the veil of belief in other, that's called cutting the belief of the belief of primitive beliefs about the veil of primitive beliefs about reality. So there are these twofold veils. The first one is the veil of conflicting emotions, which is connected with belief in an I. And the second one is the veil of primitive beliefs about reality, which is that you believe that things actually exist, that they're real. And so this twofold discovery has this is called the piercing of the twofold veil and awakening. Does that help?
Yes, and hence the kind of abject emptiness that is experienced. Like there is a time, and I believe I caught it in some of the reading. There is an element of realization of sadness when you encounter that emptiness, when you start to pierce those veils. It true
In the
as
beginning,
part of the path.
Yeah, in the beginning it could be. There's a feeling of groundlessness that could be disconcerting, but ultimately you get past that. And what it engenders in you is tremendous joy, freedom from all of the suffering and strictures that we imposed upon ourselves. But it requires a giving in to that groundlessness of vipashyana, mahavipashyana, shunyata. And if you keep practicing and keep on the path, it's inevitable. It takes you over. It's not something you create or make happen. Quite the reverse. It's more something that is happening to you, and you witness it and watch it. Maybe in the beginning, yes, there could be feelings of fear, definitely. He talks about that. But that's overcome. And it is replaced by great joy and appreciation for this world.
Thank you.
There could also be like a tenderness of your heart. That can be experienced as a kind of a sweet sadness.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry.
Robert, do you have something? You're muted.
So what you spoke about, to me, it dovetails into something, to my question. From early on, there was spoken out of the text, a marriage of differences. It's seemingly opposite things, in the humor coming out of that rather than the aggression. If I'm correct in remembering that, can you expand on that a little bit?
I don't think I could, Robert.
Do you mean when I was?
Yes.
Yeah. I would put it maybe not as the marriage of differences, but that differences could coexist so that they could be contradictory. So there isn't a merging necessarily, which is what I think of marriage. So that rather than having an awareness that needs to focus on this or that, so one thing has to be focused on, chosen as the correct thing, you have and. So you have I forgot what your question was about the
So
humor.
it's not this or that, it's this and that?
Yes.
Yes, sounds more and more like a great marriage.
What are you referring to with the great marriage? I'm not familiar with that.
Well,
Great marriage or the great marriage?
yeah, both. I think one's a representation, to me, one's a representation of the other.
Yeah. Yes. A marriage between people. Yeah.
Yeah. And the greater marriage is the one here.
Yes. Not a marriage of ideas together, but a marriage of two entities. Yeah. And then you said something about the humor.
Humor, the humor in seeing the two opposite things together. Like, suddenly, it's like the aha of the whole thing, and it's just it's like I laughed when John said earlier, nothing exists.
Yeah, so we're not here.
Yeah, nothing exists. But I mean, when the more like what sound like, it's like we're not adding anything. We always, as we're brought up in this area of the world, we have to have more, to add on, pile on. This is just taking away and being left with something that's much greater than when we started.
Yeah, so
And
that
when we started adding on, not when we started. It's tough. It's tough to explain it. It's like,
so there's like the sensibility of adding, needing to put more and more, adding more and more and more. And then this is noticing that we don't need all the more and more and more. We're just, what's here already is brilliant. It's luminous. It's we don't need anything else.
And it's a constant opportunity for play, for advance, for partnership, that we have this beautiful opportunity to interact in a creative way. It's just, and it can be joyful.
yeah, it's to me, I see it like there's any art that's masterfully done, the person is not there. Even if two people are dancing and they're really great dancers. They're just so proficient at it. There's no thinking. There's just total fluidity. Total fluidity. They will flow. The body's one. It's just like this dance of intimacy between the two of them together. It's just beautiful. And
Robert, let's pass on and give someone else an
okay,
answer to our question here.
thank you for answering my question.
Thank you for the question. Who else?
Hi.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. So I'm studying other books and stuff. So this is all kind of, it feels like it's coming together here a little bit. So I'm going to verbalize a little bit. When you talk about, Laura, when you're talking about vipashyana and the how of synchronizing our body and our speech and our mind and our existence, I guess a term that I've also studied is this idea of just pure consciousness, which I guess is similar to just being pure awareness, and the sense of the exterior world not having an impact on me the way it has in the past with my habitual thoughts and, yeah, as you say, the past or the future, those kind of thoughts. So I guess the idea is we've had pure consciousness with us since we were able to kind of start thinking for ourselves when we were very young. Consciousness has always been with us, but because of the way we grew up, right? All these things that get bombarded from us, society, family, relationships, but consciousness has always been there. However, we've always experienced, we kind of lose ourselves in our experiences of past and future. So I guess if we can get to the point where we see that pure consciousness is where peace and happiness can come, and you're no longer dependent on outside forces to fulfill you, I guess is the word I'm just thinking of. So I guess that's kind of what so whether it's groundlessness, but it's just the idea of pure, just being conscious and not allowing all these outside forces kind of influence us, and just being. I don't know if I have a question there. I'm just, sometimes when you verbalize something, it tries to, so anyway, yeah, that's kind of, yeah, thanks.
Meg.
Just sort of adding on to what Mary was talking about, I think my take on it is, Laura, when you were talking about aggression, and actually when I was reading about aggression, and this isn't a question so much as a comment, but as an artist in being involved with creativity and I guess consciousness, my biggest foe is that aggression, self-aggression.
Self-aggression, yeah.
Aggression, but it, I mean, that's the way it takes form for me, but that aggression that comes, and I lost my train of thought, so I'm not sure how I relate it to what Mary was saying, but talking about consciousness, you're not going to experience that consciousness that you're talking about if there's aggression. It just seems like it's going to totally block that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's sort of the crystal point of that article, of that chapter. Yeah. And that when you're in that awareness, that open awareness, aggression is about, knows what it wants, focused in on it, has an outcome, has an expectation. And yeah, that would be one heck of an obstacle, right? Between you and creating something fresh.
Right.
Yeah. Self-doubt. Self-doubt is the way that regression takes place. We doubt ourselves, and so we try to correct it and lose track of where we are and what we're actually experiencing. I'm remembering this wonderful poem. I'm just going to recommend it to you by Wordsworth about immortality. It's called something like Ode, Intimations of Immortality on Recollections from Early Childhood. And it's about, it's a remembering of early childhood and how vivid the world can appear to a child. And then as we grow, our minds become full of fear and worry and expectation, and it clouds that. But but young children see it much more vividly because their minds haven't become as neurotic yet. And when I read that poem, I was remembering how when I was about 6, and I lived with, there was my next door neighbor. We were great friends. Who was another 6-year-old. And these magical moments of playing in a stream, catching pollywogs, and the weeds on the stream, the skunk weeds, and crayfish underneath the banks, and we were wading in the stream. And it just, the memory is so vivid and magical. And I'm sure everybody here has those memories. Read Wordsworth's poem about an ode, about intimations of immortality. It's gorgeous. It has some lines that have stayed in the literature, become iconic. Jane, did you have something? Or you're muted still. Good.
The Four Noble Truths, suffering, and the cessation of suffering, or following the path, or the end of suffering. That's not literal, is it? There's no such thing, regardless, as the end of suffering, or is there?
It depends on whether you were born Jewish or not.
Well, then, there you go. I love it. Yeah.
We're both Jews.
Yeah, the Catholics are pretty up there too.
That's true. That's you gotta be right. Yeah, it is the end of suffering. Now that doesn't mean that you don't feel pain when you get a knife stabbed in your leg or something like that, but it's the end of wishing things were otherwise, which is the fundamental psychological suffering of constantly and regretting that things were different in the past and wishing that they'd be otherwise in the future, which takes us out of our lives and puts us into terrible mental states and makes us ineffective in the way we live, in the present moment. So it's that is the meaning of suffering that is being eliminated on the path. I remember
the end of angst.
One of the translations for suffering, the word for suffering in Sanskrit is dukkha. And a simple translation for that is dissatisfaction. One is dissatisfied and engaged in that constant act of dissatisfaction. It can become very profound.
So if one looks at suffering in a broader way, anguish, a kind of empathy with terrible things that go on, and universal suffering. It's not necessarily one's own suffering. So that's always going to exist at some level or other. I mean, there will be moments when you're not experiencing that, but there will be moments when that's part of coming back, to come back to the suffering.
there is always going to be death and decay, loss. And the question is how we deal with it. And if we deal with it wishing it or otherwise, that is the Buddhist version of suffering that is eliminated. I mean, I always quote this, tell this story about, I think I know you all know it by now, but of Suzuki Roshi dying and Rinpoche going to see him and coming back. And we asked him how Roshi was doing. He was in the hospital dying of stomach cancer. And Rinpoche said, well, he's dying like a true Buddhist. And we asked, well, what does that mean? And he said, he's curious about his own death. No fear, no wishing he wasn't dying. It was just curious about what the next stage is. And there's constant examples held up to us of how a true enlightened person goes into death, which is the greatest loss of all, right? I mean, when you die, you can lose a finger, you can lose an arm, you can lose your lover, you can lose your child, but when you die, you lose the whole world, everything. And yet there's this constant invocation to us that we can go into death cheerfully, even joyfully. Like, what's the next stage? What's the next adventure? What's the next? With curiosity, fearlessly.
Is that different from accepting the suffering as part of a human experience, and to live with it, to be scarred by it, to feel it, but accept it? Or is that different?
I think accepting it is certainly part of it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Accepting it and dealing with it. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was terrific. I bet everybody here has got those memories from childhood of how vivid the world appeared in a certain moment in time, and how delightful it was, and the quality of play. Really, that is, maybe it's not perfect, but it's very much a sort of a bringing up of enlightened mind. It's naive, underdeveloped, but it's still that freshness.
Can I just ask one other question, John? It'll be quick. Can one's feeling of being purely conscious, why is there such an anti using the word I? Because for me, I is being conscious. Is that okay for that to be synonymous? The I is being conscious, being purely conscious, and not allowing the external world have so much impact on me. Why is I? I like I, but I guess why is that such a bad subject pronoun to use for pure conscious? Why is this such an anti-I mentality?
Laura, Barry?
You can table it, it's all right, but I like I think I for me is really very clear in terms of wanting to be purely conscious, to get to that level of such peace and happiness, and not being able to, and to me I is a warm word for me. I don't find it so
Well, I could attempt to say something about that.
Go ahead, Barry. Sure. Anybody. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
That I think this is one of these things that can be kind of confusing, because there is something here, right? It's just that what we normally experience as ourself, as I, is actually a story. Like of all of these things that we've done, and we cherry pick this and that and the other thing out of it to tell a story. It's like the legend of I. And so much of what we do is in working on that legend, of reinforcing it and demonstrating it and trying to find things around us to make it more substantial. And that's what we're giving up. It's not that there's anything wrong with the term I. It's just that by becoming more and more aware and moving more and more into vipashyana, it's like you become less and less self-referential. Less and less is about how it affects me or how I should relate to it. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps, but I still feel you can use the word I and become more neutral and drop the storylines and the self-aggrandizing and look and the filter. But I still think the word I can be used synonymously with maybe with being and with pure conscious, getting to that level of vipassana and being comfortable with that.
Sure.
Can I say something? When you said that, Mary, why is there such an anti-I mentality? My immediate thought was, why is there such an anti-not-I mentality? I think that's much more predominant, you know?
Yeah, but if we're studying to get onto the path of pure
Yes,
consciousness,
it is among Buddhists, right?
then I feel the I can have a different perspective.
I understand.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I don't know if anyone else has read the book, How to Change Your Mind, and I can't remember who wrote it. But they were trying to get to the part of the brain that is our ego, and they called it like the DSM or the default mode network. And he was talking about how some scientists think that is where we store our ego. And they was talking about how through meditation or through mind altering drugs, which people, take for depression or whatever. But anyway, kind of like calming that down, then you can get to the watcher who is your consciousness. And it's not like you're not you. It's just like you're calming down that default mode network that is just always blocking the real experience, instead of like always going back to our stories. And that's kind of how I view it. I don't know if that's how it is, but that's what I'm thinking it is. I don't know if that's correct.
Thank you, Danny. That's really that book and that whole idea of the default mode network is putting the Buddhist terminology into neurological scientific language.
Yeah.
It's another language for describing very similar things.
It really seemed to fit. It's a good book.
Yeah.
It is getting late here, folks. So
Yeah, I think we have to end because we're at 7,
I think
9.
if I could just say something here, which is that, I mean, my experience certainly is a lot of these classes are so rich. It's sort of like having a big meal. I need a little time to digest it. So I encourage all of you to come back tomorrow evening.
Maybe not all of you.
Well, except for a couple of you.
Yeah, it's wonderful. We've been having great conversations on Wednesday. I was unsure if it would really be good, but so far it is. Been terrific.
Great.
So let's close by dedicating the merit.
Sure.
We're being bodhisattvas and dedicating the merit to the benefit of all sentient beings, which includes us. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. by the confidence of the golden sun of the great east. May the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank
you,
you.
John.
Be well.
Very
Thanks,
John.
John. Thanks,
Yes,
John.
Laura,
Yeah,
thank
all
you
right.
so much. And
Thank
John,
you.
so much.
Thank you.
See you in the morning.
Yeah,
Come
terrific.
on,
Meeting, Jane, it's really great.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good night, Robert.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good to
Good
see
night, John.